Our first activist.
That's me?
Yes, of course it is.
Okay.
Apart from, you can introduce yourself, Hans. I've done enough talking.
No, introduce.
So, Johannes Berner, apart from having the sad story of his life being that he shares a company with me, and has done so for quite a lot of years, has been active in doing LARPs and activism in both LARP and non-LARP ways for many, many years. When he was a lot younger, he had his almost daily rounds at the Danish Parliament, trying to lobby politicians and do student politics, and some of that skill he has taken with him to when he does LARPs. He's in the Danish LARP scene. He was the chairman of the national organization for a couple of years, trying to promote a yes but instead of a no go away kind of a feel to the thing, and has worked tirelessly to do lobby work both on a national and local community level. He's also a crazy expert at fundraising, and in the last year got about $550,000 in grants for projects for our local organization, the Role Playing Factory. Do you want me to make you sound more impressive, or are you on a good enough level?
A little more activistic would be good. No.
Yes.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much, Claus. I have 5 minutes. Can you please say on 1 minute?
Yes.
So, what I think that we can do with the LARP community is also what Stuart Candy was saying, that we can change the world by having people dreaming. That is one of the most important parts that we don't learn in our school system is future, we call it. We don't have future on our class. And that is one of the things that we can do when creating imaginary worlds. That's one point. Then, he's better in talking about that, so I will not talk that much about that. That is one of the important parts that I have no solution for. Hopefully we can learn something we can do it, or discuss with you how to create it. One of the other things that when we play as kids, or as youth, as grown-ups, we learn stuff by speaking in crowds, we learn stuff by organizing stuff, we learn leading. Especially if we make game designs that have some clear goals. Of course, if we have goals of exclusion, if we have goals about chauvinistic nationalism, then the output, the forms that our game design will take is different. And in Denmark, we have tried for a couple of years to have a discussion on what was the goals and values on the actual LARP scene and tabletop scene in the community. Not just what we would like it to be, but what was happening in the woods with the kids, with the orcs and the elf, what was happening in the classrooms at Festival, with the freeform scene, was happening at Cabo. What was the value in these different situations, both in the games and outside? And I have a paper for you. Normally I have to make the introduction. When we go through, we read it up with our new organizers and team leaders, sentence by sentence, and also here I'm not good at reading English. I will not hand it out now, because then you will look at it during the next presentations. You can have it afterwards, or you can have it in the discussions. But we have some core values, and we have some principles, and we have some methods in Bifrost, that is the Danish national organizations. And we try to, since it's built from the local chapters, Bifrost is not a top-bottom organization, top-down organization, sadly. I would love it to be at some point, especially when we have made the values that you can get everybody bind by is buttoned up, and that makes it much longer to implement stuff from all the different chapters. Our core values our principles are on developing youth, kids and youth into be better humans, and developing new creative and political methods of expressing yourself. You can read it afterwards. Then we have 3 principles. We have the reflecting human being. No, we have the creative individual. That is where it starts. You want to play something. You want to experience, you have a fire to seek out what will happen if I do this. And that came out of curiosity. How is it to be an orc, or creativity, trying to make something together, and joy of creation, to make something together in it. And that leads into obligating community. It's a circle here. That also have about taking responsibility in the community, but it's also inherent in our activities that we do. If we don't take responsibility to play together, then nothing will happen. Then I will play in my corner, and Lisa will play in her corner, and John will play in his corner over here. And of course, that will be a wonderful Finnish Larp, where we'll sit in our immersion closet. So it can be done. And then that will lead to a reflecting human being. Or at least it was what we were seeing in our chapters, where if you discuss the games, and that will lead to new creative individuals that want to do something else based on the reflection they have done. And then the circles go round and round and round. And that is try to say for the game designers and the lab producers, try to measure your value, your game design and all your actions up for the methods and the principles, values. Was the words. I will not go into the methods.
Johannes Axner, who not only does speaker timers, which he's an expert, but he is also.
I would only consider myself an amateur on speaker timers.
He's also a tireless activist when it comes to issues of gender and social justice, the right way, not the negative way. Apart from that, which he does in many communities, he loves guns, so he fits well in America. And he has been running for some years in the Nordic Larp community. He's been running the nordiclarp.org website voluntarily and without a lot of help. I can say from one of the people who does very little, he gets basically no help at all. So not only does he do organizational activism, he also does it on a personal level and in many different communities, and usually radical, loud, but with a lot of love. Johannes Axner, the floor is yours, and we have a speaker time.
So, I am a autonomous socialist, feminist, and anti-fascist, and that is central in my activism. And this also shapes how I do activism. I do not believe that LARP can change the world, not in the way that is often assumed and talked about. I do not believe that LARP empathy training in itself will make people magically be friends, because I think that is based on a faulty analysis of conflict. I believe that you have to look at the power structure. So I think that LARP as activism can do many things. It can be used in the sense of traditional activism as to point attention to an issue. It can be used as a Brechtian theater of the oppressed, as sort of an internal tool, much like Anders was talking about, that you both build skill sets but also build confidence, like within an organization, within a group. A marginalized group can LARP in ways that empower them and make them see that they have potential to elevate themselves from a situation. So that's where I think that sort of the core activism to LARP is. And what I am doing specifically with it is, besides being an opinionated asshole, going to other people's panels, being a loudmouth, and standing here talking, I'm a member of an organization called Berättelsefrämjande, which is really clunky to translate because it means something like facilitators of storytelling or of stories. We just call ourselves the storytellers in English. We do LARPs that we jokingly internally call Socialist Summer Camp. And so all our LARP will be based around ideological ideas. And mostly it's about different social justice issues, but also be functional LARPs in other ways. Our main campaign is a post-apocalyptic world, which is very down-to-earth and realistic. We also do other games. One upcoming one is The Witches of Asta Farm, which is about alternate history Europe where witches are real and has been forbidden to be used in wartime. So during the Second World War, they're interned. And witches in this context are mostly women. So it's a game that outwardly has a fictional story that is exciting. It's also topical in the context of Sweden's internment of people in the Second World War. And it's also, of course, about female empowerment and internalizing the idea of the strength and intelligence of women having to be subdued. So that I would say is a typical type of LARP we do. I'm not sure I need to say much more than this. So, but I think it's important to be uncomfortable, and both internally to yourself, to be self-critical, to see what have we done right, what have we done wrong, and to move forward and see like what are things we can do. I will take one last example to say about the uncomfortable thing. We did a Larp called Duskland, which was in the post-apocalyptic world, in a hyper-capitalist settlement, very inspired by Wild West fiction. People would be day laborers and hardly get through the day, and you would work for tokens and you exchange tokens for food. And we built in a revolution in the game. It's very common in genre games to have a revolution or final battle the last day. And there's a victory and everyone's super happy. And we put that in the middle of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a trade union organize a revolution, throw over the bosses, and then how do you handle that situation? Because that's much more interesting than playing revolution, because we can do that all the time. It's interesting in how do we move forward after enacting radical change? How to make it sustainable? How do we make sure that no other marginalized group is oppressed instead, etc. So doing uncomfortable stuff, doing things that are also fun, not only for the radical politics, and Larp can change the world the way.
Excellent. Our next speaker, who I can't talk about as extensively since I only met him a few days ago, is Gabriel de Los Angeles. Oh shit.
That's the wrong reaction.
Not only is Gabriel the impressive sounding title, you're the son of the chief of the Snoqualmie tribe. It's pretty cool. Also uses Larp as a way to teach indigenous, damn, I thought I had it. Peoples about their own history and culture, since they are living in a space where a lot of people are trying to teach them about everybody else's culture. And I think, to say it very shortly, that unlike some of us, by being born with this sort of skin and this sort of privilege, we can choose to be activists. Gabriel never had that choice. His whole life is activism. We're just glad he added Larp to it as well. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I didn't actually prepare any sort of 5-minute talk on.
You can do one or two, that's fine.
And, well, no, it's that. However, in emergent ties to the things that I'm thinking about and that you've already heard me ramble on a stage for a long period of time. So let me back the story up, because of course I want to be specific about where I'm coming from. Again, my name is Gabriel de Los Angeles, and I am the son of Chief Andy de Los Angeles, who helped re-recognize our tribe within the colonizing sovereign nation that is the United States government. And so, in and of itself, it is less a title. It is part of my genealogy. It is part of the historical practices that I'm situated in. It is part of my story. And I want to begin with that story. And I also want to begin with a little bit of thinking about some of the facts that drive me to do the work that I do. In checking out some of the numbers, so I'm pursuing a PhD, right? That sounds impressive. And in pursuing those facts of those numbers, while looking over the historical decline of said numbers, of the number of people who are indigenous, whether or not they happen to be parts of recognized tribes, but they declare their identity as part of an indigenous group. I believe last year there were less than 1,000 finished indigenous PhDs. Now, that sounds like an interesting number, right? But what is the population of the United States currently? Somewhere around 330, 350 million, depending on who you qualify as a citizen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then amongst those populations, who goes to school, who goes to higher education, and then who goes from higher education, say a bachelor's level, into a master's and graduate program of sorts? Much less. So when the number is less than 1,000, say, when you situate the PhD level of education as 1% of the educational level overall from people who are finishing secondary school, then the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% becomes the 1,000 or so identities, depending on which field that you happen to be in. You may be, I may be, the only indigenous Larp scholar at least certainly at this conference, but I cannot declare myself the only in the world, but I do not have the ability to find those attachments out because the stories don't exist, because the knowledge isn't out there. When by very virtue of, as we talk about in some places within amongst ourselves as indigenous peoples, between tribes, and in the various social groupings, that the very act of giving birth is a form of resistance to the things that have occurred historically over the last several hundreds, if not thousands of years to our peoples, no matter which indigenous area you're talking to or about, then the very notion of just me being here and doing this work is already an act of resistance, as Claus said. So when the work that I want to do becomes situated in the things that I've been colonized with, aka forms of games and play that I have loved, heralded over across the years. I love JRPGs, I love D&D. I could sit there and make jokes about D&D over the various versions left and right because I loved tabletop, I loved it. And when I was introduced to LARP in the last several years by my closest and best friend, Ron Leota, who ran a podcast called Northwest Nerdcast and talked about LARP and tabletop in various ways for the community to absorb. He inducted me into something that would change the very essence of how I would wish to play. And so when that happened, when I fell in love entirely, it became the very essence of how I wanted to explore the futureness of my ways of being and seeing and thinking and philosophizing, by being able to play not only within and against the grain of the stories that dominate the one story paradigm that continues to persist. I wanted to play in those colonizing spaces, and I wanted to do so with my philosophies, with my ways of thinking. And it's difficult, and there are many, many stories to be thinking about and talking about this. It's a deep philosophical and existential place of being. But at the very root of it, when I am the only one doing this work, and I do not want to create a sense of tokenism or a justification about myself or my work, being able to be the first that's guiding that place for kids to be able to play with their cultures, represent themselves, and to be and exist and be born and reborn in their cultures and ways of being and knowing, then that very act of activism becomes operationalized.
Amherst is our fourth panelist, roundtabler. Christopher, with all honesty, I know you're an awesome speaker, but how you're going to beat that, I have no clue.
You know, he's a better dresser than me, and like a better speaker, so
He's got the whole package.
yeah.
Please, Christopher Amherst, the only thing I know about him is that he's very, very nice, very open-minded, and keeps saying people don't like him, which makes me think people actually do. He also does a ton of game design and actual games, but he can say more about that himself. Christopher Amherst.
So first, I'm going to just ask the audience, because I brought a prop with me from a game that I ran at a theater festival. The prop is there. If anyone is uncomfortable with that, I will take that away. If you all are fine with it, I will leave that there, because we will talk about it a little bit, but I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable before I start going on about what we're going to be covering next. So I'll give you guys 10 seconds, and if everyone's okay with it, I'll go on.
And having learned something smart about the last 10-second thing, we're going to do it if everybody just closes their eyes, and if you're uncomfortable, just raise your hand. I'll take note and remove the shirt. Very smart, very elegant. Open your eyes. Excellent.
Okay. So the title of the presentation, before we changed to a roundtable, the title of the presentation I had was called Disturbing the Comfortable. The whole concept here is kind of tying in what everyone's talking about with LARP as a literary tradition or as a tradition in terms of the medium. What I mean by disturbing the comfortable, I'm using the term that Cesar Cruz is using in terms of his own take on activism and what it means to be socially conscious. So when we talk about LARP, there's kind of a lot of different fields of thought. These guys have been talking about LARP as activism, but there's also a tradition of LARP that prior to LARP being seen as activism, we kind of become aware of, and that is LARP as social commentary. So we're going to talk about LARP as social commentary and LARP as activism with some examples of how that has been played out and what it exists. But the first question we need to establish is, what do we mean by social commentary and what do we mean by activism? We all have seen social commentary to some degree in our lives whatsoever. Satire is one of the easiest forms of social commentary. It's someone using humor to talk about the human condition and speak to the issues that face society as a general whole. Activism is a little different. Activism involves us actually actively doing something about what we see in society in order to make it a better place. We are actively trying to change the world. Somebody that is doing social commentary wants you to consider what's going on and then maybe take that next step. So the difference between social commentary and activism is the activation part. When we talk about being an activist, we're talking about someone that's going out there on the front lines and actually doing something to invoke the change that they want in society. But I, as a writer, could also be talking as a social commentator and saying, these are the injustices and these are the ills of the world that I see. In Larp, we've seen social commentary, and there are classic examples of this. For example, this shirt is coming from the game, the Russian freeform, The Prison, which was written in 2000. Now, I want you to kind of contextualize this. The Russians, when they wrote this game, wrote a game about pervasive surveillance and a caste-driven society where the haves and have-nots are differentiated. This is in 2000. We are in 2016. So that tells you how much writers can influence and talk about conditions that they see on the horizon, or even project a future going forward that we end up finally seeing as a realization. Another game that is a good example of social commentary, where Europa was speaking about, in its abstracted sense, speaking about what was going on in Yugoslavia in terms of the breakup of the republic that existed and all of the madness that took place afterward. But we still see that issue of refugees from another country that do not speak the language they do not speak the language of the places they are running toward because they want to feel safe. I mean, we are seeing that now with the actions that are going on in Syria. That game was written in 2001. If we fast forward, we start seeing how Larp writers have started taking a more active role in being activists. The game that probably I describe as the keystone of Larp as activism would be Capo. That was a project, Klaus, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Anas was one of the organizers, so I think you can. I was just a player.
I was going to say, that was in what, 2011? 2011. And one of the things that the designers baked into this design was not only were the players actively involved in that scenario, but they had a platform for people of the public to come and view what was going on in the game. And this was a deliberate action. This was intended to talk to the general populace prior to an election year so that they could be informed about the conditions that were going on in their own country with the migrants that were there. We fast forward now. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline. I think it's 2014 Halstead, where we've got the Finnish and Palestinian collaboration, speaking to the Palestinian experience of what it's like to be in a community that is partitioned and segregated and walled off. Now, that isn't an explicit form of activism. There was no component, but the media coverage from that and the play experience about that was designed to advocate for what it is like to be in that situation and what we, and in some ways it's commentary and activism. Commentary in the sense of speaking to what's wrong, but activism in trying to get you to do something about it after the game. And my time's up.
Christopher?
And I will say to everyone in the room, as designers, you all can be activists in your games.
Most of you probably already are, whether you know it or not. So what we're going to do right now, structurally, is we're going to create space in the middle, have a circle of chairs, of course leaving an extra one for somebody who might come in. Then we're going to have questions for our four expert activists. And two things about questions. One is, though it may, and this may sound harsh, and that's because it is, It may be very tempting to explain your whole life story before asking the question. That might not even be a question at all, that's just an opinion. Please refrain from doing this and know I will shut you down with all my evil power of satire. Number two, when you are an expert and want to answer, it is even more tempting to answer with your complete life story. As Anna says, and I'm going to cut him off because he's bad at it, no, 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 that's not okay. Keep it short, keep it simple. It's much better having 3 separate questions and 3 different answers leading on one another than making a whole pile that makes us find that. But if others come up with their figures, then they will be prioritized. So it's not that I don't see you, it's just because you have talked a lot already. Sadly, doesn't include me. That would be very nice.
Distribute the wealth.
Yes. Aha, and things are being handed out, which is very nice. So, it's simple. The floor belongs to all of you. If not, I'm sure Corey can come up with questions for each other, and if not, I can. It's very simple. Raise a hand, and I will put you on my list, and the first to go on it will be John, who will say, "Hi, I'm John," so we all know who John is.
Hi, I'm John. So I want to bring up that is any of the traditionally explicitly activist LARPs only play, are preaching to the converted, is a very possible criticism, right? The only people who will sign up for this sort of explicitly activist LARP are people who already believe that, and it simply serves to reinforce, I'm really good for having done this LARP. I don't have any great answers for that, but I want to hear people's take on that.
So I agree that those are the people who are going to be drawn to it, but I disagree that there's no value to it. So, for example, I took part of, I think it was called the apportionment, which is we gender swap a congressional hearing on biological rights, and definitely no one who wasn't already leaning feminist went to that LARP. But and this is why I LARP. Having that experience deepened my understanding and opened up a view of complex sides within the issue that I do think make me a better feminist.
Excellent. I'm just going to break in here. Thanks. That sounds really cool. I'm just going to propose another structural thing that I didn't before. When somebody asks a question, either they'll ask it directly to one of somebody here, preferably one of the 4, or a general one, and people will have a chance to answer, or I will point to somebody who has an answer, just so it doesn't go into total chaos. This was both an interesting and relevant answer, so we're not going to shoot you. The next one, however, our next question is from Johannes Axner.
I wanted to reply to that question.
That is just as good.
So, I think that LARP is generally a very bad form to inform people. Like, to do it, it's a very high threshold to be in a LARP compared to, say, seeing a movie or hearing a song. So if you construct your LARP as a way to spread awareness of an issue, I think you're making itself unnecessarily hard for yourself. You can, of course, also incorporate the spreading of an idea, but I think that what you're speaking about, for instance, that you're empowering yourself or like leveling within a field, that works well. But if your idea is to make a LARP where I'm gonna make 100 people hear for the first time about this issue and go home and be like have their eyes open, then I think you're postulating an impossible task for yourself.
That's an excellent answer. The next on the list, either for a new question or for this issue, is Johannes Berner.
I think one of the solutions to it is to remember that political art is quite boring for most of the time. Political art is quite boring in my mind.
Political
Art. If it's too much, if it's put too much, we can of course have it at some point, and it have to have its own aesthetics, or the experience that you're doing needs to be interesting in themselves. When we do game design, for me, Cabo was not the political project. It was more trying to do something artistic in it. It was for some others in the project, But if I should have done it as a political project only for that, I would have done a campaign instead. We only reached 500 or something like that, as 300 as an audience at the Larp, and that's not that much audience that come in. They can of course spread a word, and there's a lot of stuff there. I don't agree that, I think people will show up and they will have changed their opinions, and it's best to change people's opinion if they are one and then there's 10 others that wants to change their opinion. That is quite a good status, radio on it. When we want to change kids' opinion, we give them a little of what we want to give them, and a lot of what they want.
Excellent. And just before we open up for the next speaker, which is Matthew Webb, I'm just going to come with a fun activist comment on our speaking list, which contains 6 men and 0 non-men. This does not mean you have to speak if you are a non-man, but you are going to be bumped to the top of the list. Excellent. Matt?
I think another term for political art is message fiction. It's a more general thing where I'm going to make a point, and God damn it, you're going to listen to me. And we can all agree that Atlas Shrugged is a terrible book for that reason, where they have 200 pages of speaking about what Ayn Rand decided that how the world works. And that can become very boring. And if you have to be that blatant, you obviously don't have a point that can be told in this story, so maybe you have a weak point. And it is often when you move away from that, and when you start saying, I'm going to make a LARP about how fascists are evil, it often becomes better, in my opinion, if you say, I'm going to make a LARP about being a fascist. Because I'm going to quote Johannes in a conversation we had earlier, actually, where he said, anti-racism and anti-fascism is impossible without understanding the framework of a racist or a fascist. It is just the other person is a horrible monster. It is often more useful for an activist viewpoint, but it's often more scary to say, I'm going to make you realize where these people are coming from, and I'm going to make their argument coherent, and I'm going to make you deal with that coherent argument and make you address it. And that's often when we deal in a fictional mode, we have the opportunity of creating extreme personalities, but we can also take on the mode of somebody. We can talk like the 1934 German apologist who's going to explain how everything they're doing is oh so reasonable. And you can make somebody who would be adamantly opposed to that position take on that position. You have to start to understand it.
Excellent and strong points. Next is Corinne.
If people have more on that topic, I'm subject changing, so.
Keira, are you on that topic or another?
Kind of, yeah. It was more of a point that when people do these LARPs, and it's not just art, but it does have a political message, it does make a difference because people participate in the LARP. Then they talk about the LARP. They go online and talk about the LARP. There's sometimes documentation of the LARP that gets out there. And that does reach people as well who maybe don't LARP, who maybe aren't aware of the message. It's a ripple effect, like throwing a stone into the water. You don't always get the full rock hitting the head of everybody involved, but you still get an effect, and that can bring people more awareness and maybe get some new people involved in the next one. So it is a worthwhile from that standpoint, I think.
Excellent. David Simpkins is hitting someone?
Yeah, I think that often we don't know the eventual effects of what we're doing. I also think that we have, like other people have said, that we have a couple different reasons for engaging in political awareness raising. I'm not sure that some of the things we call activist LARP, I would call activist LARP. I think I might call it social commentary, right? Active social commentary. Activist LARP, I think, can exist, but maybe we should be putting it in people's faces, or maybe we should be, breaking some of the norms of LARP in order to challenge people's everyday life, which might work and might not. Maybe we can think of other ways of being activists. But if we're only talking to people we agree with and trying to improve their understanding, our own understanding of a phenomenon, I think it's another form of social commentary. But that can be useful. And one of the things I think we're not talking about is preparation of future activism. We have an important role. Any group needs core members that are going to know how to activate through activism. And I think that one of the things we can do is prepare for future activism. Another thing we can do is exactly kind of parallel to what you were saying. I think as a teacher, this is a liberal model as opposed to a radical model, but we can we can take the things that we all take as understood and problematize them. So if we're in a group where socialism is seen as, social welfare is seen as the ideal, then make a constrained material economy and make hard choices in the context of socialism, right? Doesn't mean socialism's wrong, but it means we're bumping against the barriers of what we want. There's a point for utopianism. I'm not saying always do that. There's a point for other things, right? But there's a point for doing all sorts of things that just raise our awareness and then our ability to go out and be active.
Excellent. Short piece of love. David, tons of interesting points. If we can chop them next time, I will love you even more. Next is Gabriel, and we're just going to cut this off before too long so we can get on to Corinne's next opening question. So I have 3 people on my list before we jump further. Gabriel's one of them.
So to problematize the space of when I hear that, and researcher brain always going off, listening to linguistics and how we're talking about this thing, of how we gatekeep specifically who is and who isn't doing the work, or what we qualify as the work. Recall a fantastic article that was on I don't remember where I saw it anymore online, about Slacktivism, the commentary, that the idea that only changing your Facebook profile picture over to cover the French flag in response to these things is not a form of activism. But at the same time, when the very nature of being and existing is a form of resistance to the things that are going on, those who are in a different layer of the journey of activism, a different level of experience in the layer of journey of activism, will find solidarity in seeing that their messages are echoed out amongst the general populace. And so when the general populace sees something they don't understand going on, then the inquiry begins, then the cascading effect goes on, then all these things happen that because we are limiting our vision to what we might consider a form of activism, then we might be silencing those who are actually doing work that will help forward your own cause to the general populace.
Excellent. Emily is next on this list. Emily Campos.
I wanted to talk about, not that I'm an expert in it, but the Larp Summer School, and the value in taking the tools that we're using and making them available, looking at how they're useful to interpret and reinterpret your social context, and putting them in the hands of people who can really apply them to their lives, to people around them, and supporting the others that are going on that are doing that. And also for myself, I situate Larp in the field of art, and that's about communication and about broad communication throughout all of society, which changes minds and repositions where we are, just as Gabriel was saying. You have to see what's in your heart reflected outside before you can take a step to know that you can make it be in the world. So there's a lot of different ramifications of what we do, but that's one of the most important ones for me.
Christopher, you get the last word in this, and then we open up a new topic.
Okay. It's tough to call. David, I'm going to address one of the points you made, which was the using Larp as a means to activate the next generation. And I'm going to pull from the article I did at Somakota just to drop a statistic. 61.9% of the individuals that were American in the Larp census were between the ages of 20 and 34 years of age. Now, if we think about who is that next generation that we want to pick up activism, we're talking about the youth, the college-age students, the teenagers, and all of those. They make up 60% of anybody that is identifying as a LARPer on their own. And that to me means that there is power in numbers with that, and that those of us that are in the older generations or the ones that are designing games have some obligation to consider the fact that if we want to reach them, it's a broad audience. We can reach them. We just need to kind of have the willingness to do so.
Excellent. And I'm just going to explain why. We're not going to discuss this because we can discuss this for a long time, but open up for something new. This roundtable does not have the function of emptying the subject or exhausting it completely. Hopefully everyone here will go out wanting to talk to the other people and say, I want to talk more about this. So you're going to be cut off when it's the most interesting. Now you know the reasons. Corinne.
So I want to push Johannes on the idea that LARP cannot change the world, because I think I disagree with you, but because I do not know how we talk about LARP changing the world generally, I do not know that I disagree fundamentally with your point. So if you could clarify, I kind of want to open that up.
Excellent. I think we'll get that from all of our 4 panelists, because that's an interesting thing to have an answer to, and I know there's disagreement in the room already. That's good. Johannes?
I think it's a very common thing, common to the point of being accepted as truth within the Nordic and, as far as I understand, wider European LARP scene, that the powerful way that LARP changes things is that you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And with that, I disagree as a powerful thing for change. It's for personal growth and change, it's great, but for changing any sort of, like, from a Marxist perspective, how does my internal change question this power structure? It really doesn't. So that's where I'm a Marxist, and I think that's a liberal standpoint, and I think it's wrong.
Excellent. Anders Berner?
I disagree with Johannes. I think that if we can get enough people to do new practices, playing new games, then if it's taking one day off in a 7-day work week, to call it holy, or to say that you do a prayer before you eat, or that you always bring an extra chair, or that you have to play how you play family when you're a kid. The structure of a father and a mother and a sister and a brother. If we make games that resonate and learn people something positive to how to live their life, we can change the world. And if we don't want to do that, change the world, we should just not do that. But I would like to do it, and I think there's shitload of potentials to do it. I think the difficult part is to how to make positive games that don't comment on society, but also learn people how to live their life. And the other part is how to make structures that will make it possible for others to enable to make change in the world. Sorry for taking so long.
No, that was excellent. Christopher? Are you going to be in the middle, getting fired on by both sides?
So I agree with Anders' point on that LARP can change the world. Although I will make the argument that it is much easier when we're talking about college students and children, because they are much more flexible in their understanding of the world in that case, whereas when we're talking about adults, less so. And in the American community, this is even harder to do, because the default